The sun beat down on the cracked earth like a hammer on an anvil. John McGrath wiped his brow with a dust-stiff handkerchief and squinted at the horizon. 3 weeks without rain. The creek bed had been dry for 10 days, and his last well was giving up nothing but mud and broken promises. He was checking the fence line near Devil's Ridge when he saw her, a small figure stumbling through the scrub brush, moving in that particular way that told him she was past exhaustion and running on pure will. McGrath nudged his horse forward. As he got closer, he could see she was Apache, maybe 12 years old, her lips cracked and bleeding, her dark eyes unfocused. She saw him and froze, swaying on her feet like a sapling in a storm. He raised one hand slowly, palm out. With the other, he reached for his canteen, the only one he had, half full with the last drinkable water from his cistern. He'd been rationing it to make the ride out and back. "Easy now," he said softly, dismounting. "I'm not going to hurt you." She watched him like a cornered animal as he approached, but she didn't run. Couldn't run, more like. Her knees buckled, and McGrath lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. She was light as a bundle of kindling, her skin fever-hot beneath the dust. He unscrewed the canteen and held it to her lips. "Slow," he murmured. "Just a little at first." She drank desperately, and he had to pull it back to keep her from making herself sick. Her eyes met his dark, intelligent eyes that held more wariness than gratitude. She was Apache. He was white. The history between their peoples was written in blood and broken treaties, and both of them knew it. When she'd had enough to revive her a bit, McGrath helped her into the shade of a scraggly mesquite. He gave her the rest of the water, every last drop, watching her drink it down. His own throat felt like sandpaper, his tongue thick in his mouth, but he'd been thirsty before. This girl had been dying. "Where's your people?" he asked, though he didn't expect an answer. She pointed northwest, toward the mountains, then made a gesture he didn't understand. Something about separation, maybe. Lost. She'd gotten lost or separated from her group. McGrath looked at his empty canteen, then at the girl, then at the sun beginning its slow descent toward evening. The ranch was 8 miles south. The mountains were at least 10 miles northwest, through some of the roughest country in the territory. He didn't have enough water to make it home, let alone to go searching for an Apache camp that might not welcome him even if he found it. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded. He helped her onto his horse and swung up behind her. The girl sat rigid in front of him, still wary, but she didn't resist. McGrath turned the horse northwest, toward the mountains. They rode in silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. McGrath's mouth grew drier with each mile, his head beginning to pound. He knew this was foolish, potentially fatal, but leaving her out here would have been worse than foolish. It would have been murder by abandonment, and John McGrath had already seen enough death in his 53 years. The girl made a small sound and pointed. McGrath saw nothing at first, then caught a glint of movement on a ridge. Riders, 3 of them, watching. Apache scouts. The girl called out in her language, her voice thin but carrying in the still air. The riders approached slowly. 3 warriors, faces hard as the stone cliffs behind them, rifles held ready. One of them was older, his face a map of wrinkles and old scars. When he saw the girl, something shifted in his expression. The girl spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing to McGrath, to the empty canteen hanging from his saddle. The old warrior's eyes moved from her to McGrath and back again. A long moment passed. McGrath sat perfectly still, hands visible, making no move toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Finally, the old warrior spoke in rough English. "You give water." "Yes," McGrath said simply. "Your water. Last water." "Yes." The warrior studied him for another long moment, then nodded. He said something in Apache to the others, and one of them rode forward to take the girl. She slid from McGrath's horse, then turned back and looked at him. She said something in her language. He had no idea what, then touched her hand to her heart. "Go," the old warrior said to McGrath. "Go now, before dark." McGrath nodded and turned his horse south. He didn't look back, just rode into the gathering dusk with his empty canteen and his burning throat and his pounding head. The stars were coming out by the time he reached his ranch, and he fell more than dismounted, crawling to the cistern to drink the muddy dregs that remained. He slept the sleep of the exhausted and woke to voices. McGrath stumbled from his house, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle by the door. Then he stopped, blinking in the morning light. There were maybe 20 Apache in his yard. Not a war party. He could see that immediately. There were women among them, and children, and they carried no weapons he could see. The old warrior from yesterday sat on a paint horse, and beside him, looking considerably better than she had the previous day, was the girl. McGrath's hand fell away from his rifle. He walked forward slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Morning," the old warrior gestured. Two young men came forward carrying clay vessels. They set them down near McGrath's cistern, then stepped back. The warrior said something in Apache, and the girl translated in halting English. "Grandfather say, you give water when you have none. You bring me home when your home is far. This is not forgotten." The vessels, McGrath realized, were full of water, clear, sweet water from some hidden spring in the mountains that the Apache knew and white men didn't. But that wasn't all. Other members of the group were unloading things from horses: bundles of dried meat, baskets of pine nuts, a deer hide, beautifully tanned, gifts, trade goods, an offering of respect. McGrath felt something tighten in his chest. "This is too much," he said. "I didn't do it for payment." The girl translated. The old warrior replied, and she spoke again. "Grandfather say, you know. That is why we come. You see Apache girl, not enemy. You see person, human. In bad times, when white man and Apache fight, you choose different. You choose." She struggled for the word, then settled on kindness. The warrior continued, and the girl's face grew serious. "Grandfather say the water is gift. The food is trade. But more we remember. If you need help, if your ranch is in danger, if bad men come, you send word. Apache remember friend." McGrath didn't trust himself to speak for a moment. In all his years on this land, through all the conflicts and tensions between settlers and the Apache, he'd never imagined something like this. He'd simply done what seemed human, what seemed right, and now here stood 20 people treating him with more honor than most of his white neighbors had ever shown. "Tell your grandfather," he said finally, "that John McGrath remembers too, and that his granddaughter is brave and strong." The girl smiled for the first time, a quick, bright flash, and translated. The old warrior nodded gravely, then raised one hand in farewell. The group mounted their horses and rode northwest, back toward the mountains, leaving McGrath standing in his dusty yard with vessels of clear water and provisions enough to see him through the drought. He stood there for a long time after they'd gone, watching the dust settle. Then he walked to the cistern and poured one of the vessels into it, watching the clear water splash into the mud. He filled his canteen from the other vessel and drank deep, the water cool and sweet on his tongue. That evening, when his neighbor Tom Berkeley rode by to see how he was managing the drought, McGrath told him the story. Berkeley listened with growing amazement. "You gave your last water to an Apache?" Berkeley said, shaking his head. "John, that was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I ever heard." McGrath looked toward the mountains, where the last light was fading from the peaks. "Maybe," he said, "but I'll tell you this, Tom. That old warrior and I both understood something yesterday. We're all just trying to survive out here. Apache, white, Mexican, doesn't matter. This land is hard on everyone. And sometimes, doing the right thing is the only thing that separates us from animals." Berkeley rode off shaking his head, but McGrath noticed that the story spread, and in the years that followed, there were a few other ranchers who, when they encountered Apache in need, remembered John McGrath's story and chose kindness over fear. As for McGrath, he never saw the old warrior or the girl again. But 3 years later, when a band of cattle rustlers tried to make off with his herd, he woke to find them hogtied in his yard, his cattle returned, and a single eagle feather stuck in his door, a message that needed no translation. The Apache remembered, and so did he. In a territory defined by conflict, John McGrath's small act of humanity had created something rare and precious, a bridge of respect built on the simple recognition that water, life, and kindness mattered more than the color of a person's skin or the language they spoke. And in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Southwest, where water was more valuable than gold and trust was harder to find than diamonds, that bridge stood firm, a testament to what was possible when people chose to see each other's humanity first.